Frost Sorceress is absolutely tearing through the campaign in Path of Exile 2, and today I'm bringing you my updated FrostBolt Stormweaver build that follows directly on from my first video and will take you towards the latter stages of the game until you get cast on freeze and comet later in Act 3. The key variation of this build is that we're able to have both a triple frost bomb and a triple cold snap at the same time, which I found to be superior to the other versions of the build I've seen online. There will be a planner link down in the comments below. So for those of you who don't know what this build is about, the focus of this build is to apply tons of crowd control to enemies by freezing them, reducing their defenses against cold damage, and then dealing huge amounts of damage by shattering them. Our opening skill for all engagements is Frost Bomb. Now not only does this deal huge damage, but more importantly it applies cold exposure each time it pulses. Cold exposure reduces your enemy's resistances to cold damage by 20%, and then thanks to our Stormweaver node Scouring Winds, Frost Bomb will now reduce our enemy's cold resistance by a whopping 40%, which means they get annihilated by cold damage. We have the support gem Spell Cascade, which allows us to spawn 3 frost bombs at the same time. Now the downsides of this is that we lose a little bit of damage, but having 3 frost bombs at once is so worth it for the trade-off. It will allow you to cover larger areas for dealing with multiple enemies, and it feels way better to use against bosses that are mobile than the single frost bomb. So many times using the single frost bomb variant, I found that bosses just move away from it, and then you've wasted the cast. This triple frost bomb variant really helps negate that. I've also applied the magnified effect support gem here, so overall we still have a larger AoE effect, even with the penalty from Spell Cascade. Now all 3 frost bombs will have good coverage. Now in our old build we had to wait for enemies to freeze before we could shatter them with Cold Snap, but no longer. We now use FrostBolt with Scatter Shot, so we fire 3 frost bolts towards the enemy. I've even added the Glaciation support gem onto FrostBolt so we can freeze enemies even faster. Along with Frost Bomb, Cold Snap is our main damage ability, and what it does is it consumes a freeze and then shatters enemies for huge amounts of damage. What you can do is you can Cold Snap frost bolts to cause huge amounts of damage, so you don't need to wait for enemies to freeze. At base, Cold Snap will only blow up one of these frost bolts. We actually want to explode all 3, so we use the Unleash support gem, which now lets us blow up all 3 frost bolts at once. Being able to have triple frost bomb and triple cold snap is amazing. And then to juice up the cold snap damage even further, I've added the concentrated effect support gem, which applies 40% more damage to cold snap. Our 2 remaining skills are the icing on the cake, primarily for stronger enemies. The first is hypothermia, which applies a curse to enemies, reducing their cold resistance by 32%. With the support gem persistence, we can make this enemy debuff last 40% longer, which does increase the mana cost. But thanks to inspiration as our second support gem, we can reduce that mana cost straight away, making it less mana hungry. Our other skill we use is Firewall. Why? Because it applies Ignite, which is a strong damage over time effect, which is really useful against bosses to continue to inflict damage whilst you concentrating on dodging their attacks. Often you'll find you don't have time to stand still and fire off a Frostbolt. All you have time really is to use Frost Bomb and Firewall and continue dodging, because both of these attacks have really short cast speeds. If you fire Frostbolt through the Firewall, it will add fire damage to our Frostbolts and make it look pretty funky, which is nice and all, but it's not required. For trash enemies, it's often faster to just use Frost Bomb, Frostbolt and Cold Snap. There's no need to waste time casting Firewall or Hypothermia. I didn't add the Fortress support gem on here because I've heard it also reduces your Ignite damage, which would be a big L if true. Let me know in the comments below if that bug is true or not, but if it is true then you definitely don't want to add Fortress. So the damage rotation is as follows. For trash enemies, you want to start off by using Frost Bomb first to apply cold exposure and freeze them. Then fire off Frost Orbs and use your Cold Snap to shatter them. Weaker enemies don't need Hypothermia and Firewall because casting them slows you down. For bosses, you want to make sure you apply Frost Bomb, Firewall and Hypothermia first because your damage windows are shorter. So you want to make sure these 3 are up at all times. Then in between you want to cast Frost Bomb and Cold Snaps. Let's go over our passive tree next. Take this tree with a pinch of salt. I'm low on gold and haven't been able to respec, so I'll show you the path I've taken, which worked well for my Act 1 build, but then I'll show you the optimal path for Act 2 and 3 and later on. I started off by taking these energy shield nodes to help with survivability. Honestly, when your gear is bad in Act 1 and 2, having the extra energy shield is a lifesaver. Once your gear does become better, then definitely switch these nodes out for the spell damage route here on the left. Then what you want to get is these cast speed nodes here. Why? Because when you're dodging around, especially against bosses, you'll want to squeeze in an extra cast or 2 of Frostbolt, which does have a little bit of a wind up time, so the extra cast speed really helps. Then I came up here to get the extra cold damage and freeze build up, then get Breath of Ice, which will penetrate more cold resistance against enemies, and aim for this node here, exploit the elements, which will improve our damage when enemies are afflicted by chill or freeze. Now my initial Act 1 build, I did obtain these nodes here on the right, which helped with freeze buildup and more damage when we chilled enemies. But honestly, I'm going to refund these nodes. There's 13 here in total, which will help me to focus on going straight off up here and aiming for these cold nodes here, which are very powerful. The main one here is Blizzard, which improves all our cold skills by +1. We also have Glaciation, which improves our cold exposure even more, which is very powerful. The other nodes to aim for here are these ones, which again improve our cold exposure by another 30%. If you haven't realized, maximizing cold exposure is very powerful for the build, which is why Frostbomb is so good. This is also what drives our initial Ascendancy node choice, Scouring Winds. I did initially try Tempest Caller, but it didn't feel too good. For a Frost build, Scouring Winds is just too good to miss out on. Let's go over our gear. Quick disclaimer, my gear is absolutely horrible, which shows how powerful the build is, and also highlights the main weakness for me playing Path of Exile 2 so far. And that's not enough good quality gear drops or enough crafting materials to make up for that lack of good quality gear. But honestly, if I spend the video talking about that, that could be a whole separate video, so let's not focus on that too much. For your weapon, the most powerful affix you want to find is +1, +2, or if you're really lucky, +3 level to all cold skills. That's going to juice up your damage by a ton and overlevel your abilities to where you are in the game. You can see my weapon here is trash. You want something more like this. There are some hidden gems out there on trading websites, so do keep an eye out for them. Other good affixes on your weapon include cold damage, spell damage, and cast speed. You absolutely don't need a staff. You could also go for a wand and focus as well. Whichever has the better rolls, prioritize those. For your armor, the highest priority is on your boots. You want movement speed. There are virtually no movement-based abilities in the game, especially early on, and maps are huge in Path of Exile 2. So movement speed will make everything feel so much better for leveling. It's also going to help you with your kiting abilities a lot, which is super useful as a range class. For armor, in general, you want resistances, maximum life, and mana regeneration. One thing to mention is you want to be socketing decently rolled armor whilst you're leveling with these Artificer Orbs. What this does is it allows you to socket runes, which really help you to target certain affixes. I would always just target affixes which make up for your resistances. For example, the Act 2 boss does tons of lightning damage, so I added this Storm rune to improve my lightning resistance, which did help me kill the Act 2 boss. You get the gist. For flasks, you want to ideally chase the flasks which can recover charges per second. This means even when you're not killing enemies or you run out of charges, you can just passively gain charges by stalling for time. For your charm, pick the charm to make up for your resistance that you lack in, or target the charm that will help you kill that boss. So there you have it, my updated Frostbolt build that will take you through the latter stages of Act 1, all of Act 2, and even Act 3 until you get Cast on Freeze and Comet skills unlocked. If you enjoyed what I talked about today, remember to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Path of Exile build videos as we get deeper into the game. I'm Mr. Ronnet, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.